I'm delighted to say Fergus Connolly is with us. You're home for a while anyway.
Home for a few days.
Yeah, is it a flying visit and then back to Michigan?
Yeah, got in on Tuesday morning and head back Sunday, so short visit. Nice to get home. I haven't been home for I think it's about 2 years now. So
okay, right.
It's nice to get back.
Yeah, so that last 2 years, we may as well start at the most recent point before we get to the beginnings of this. I said earlier on, you've got one of the most interesting careers in Irish sport, and at the moment, you're working with Jim Harbaugh at the University of Michigan. We'll talk about your path to that in a couple of minutes' time, but like for people who are unaware, this is like one of the biggest, most storied football programs in America.
Yeah, and you know, I guess even when I started working, I didn't really appreciate how big you know, the university is, the football program, the legacy, and it's an incredible organisation. And college football, as you know, is so big, so can be a little bit daunting at times. You know, when you play, you've got 110,000 people in the stadium every single weekend.
It's ridiculous.
It is. You know, you walk out and you look around, and you know, I've been fortunate at Croke Park, Millennium Stadium, but 110,000 people in a stadium packed is a little bit different. It's the biggest every weekend in college sport. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the biggest in world sport, is it? Or is there?
I think it is, and I think we still hold the record. I think there were 115 at one particular game.
Squeezed in.
So, you know, well, it's 5,000 at that stage. But yeah, no, it's great, and there's an incredible legacy, and you know, there's a you know, a very famous coach previous, Bo Schembechler, and the history and the stories with that program. So yeah, it's an impressive program.
With Ohio State, would that match be the highlight of the year? I know it was. There you go. I think that was Ann Arbor this year, wasn't it? And it didn't go so well.
Yeah. No. The rivalry between, you know, that is the biggest game in college sport every single year. Ohio State, Michigan is singularly the biggest game, yeah, every year.
What do you do?
A little bit of everything, to be quite honest. I started off originally working in performance, strength and conditioning, nutrition, the actual performance of the players. My job took on more responsibility this year with operations, which is essentially all of the running of the program. So everything from scheduling flights to hotels to, for example, so we had the bowl week in Tampa, so making sure that basically if anything goes wrong, or I have to make sure nothing goes wrong, and the head coach, I see it before he does.
Yeah.
So,
he shouts at you, basically.
Well, pretty much he'll come to me first, and I need to have an answer. Or, as I joke with him, I need to see it before he does. But it's, you know, that's what you live for, those challenges, you know. And you get better and better at it. So
they're very different things, like operations and performance. I mean, obviously there's like, you know, you need to be organised and you need to be able to kind of have the vision, and you need to have the ultimate end goal of trying to make a successful programme. I can see why somebody who trusts you in one sphere would go, okay, I want you to look after this as well. But from your own career perspective, they're quite different things, aren't they?
Yes, but in order for a program to run, or any organisation to run smoothly, the two have to be linked, because just simply a simple example is scheduling meals, to make sure they're scheduled at the appropriate time. There's nobody better than the operations person to make sure once you have those in place. I think also, as you build with any organisation, you have to build a pathway, so you can't go from 0 to 60. So when you have the performance model in place, then you can build the operations on top of it. So it's making sure that they're synced. It provides a huge advantage.
So if anybody again is unaware, Jim Harbaugh is the head coach we're talking about, and there's always this thing about Harbaugh. He comes in, he's got this intense work ethic, and then after a period of time in various other organisations, he's moved on. I have a feeling that maybe that narrative is not necessarily going to happen this time. I mean, I understand he's under pressure because he's got to win a load of games, and when you get paid the money he does, that's always going to be the case. But that ultimately, this time, he seems to have found a job where it's the right job for him, and the burnout that maybe some of the players might have had in the past, allegedly, I don't know if that's true or not, we can talk about that, I can see you smiling already, that doesn't happen in college because the players naturally move through anyway. So, you know, you can refresh your playing pool every 2.5, 3 years automatically.
Yeah, and I think Michigan means something different to Jim Harbaugh. You know, he played there, his father coached there. He is it means something different to him, and I think as well, you know, we have to be successful and we have to win. So it's a little bit different than the pros. And college football is very, very different from the NFL because you're right, the players change and the players come through. So there's a lot more focus on development and getting players to the NFL. I think in the NFL itself, it's a lot more fluid. Both players and coaches move.
Yeah.
There's not as much movement in college.
Is it your gut instinct that you're going to be at Michigan for a while?
Hopefully, yeah. I think Michigan it's unique in that there's no other university has the combination of academic development, research, and sport performance. Stanford have one, don't have the other. Notre Dame, whatever. But Michigan is unique in that sense. So we can draw on a lot of the development, the research in engineering and the other sporting domains to improve the football program.
And presumably it takes a little while for you guys all to get as good at this as you will eventually become. Like, you're going to get better year on year.
That's always the plan. And all good programs become ruthless and more efficient in terms of finding their best pathway to success, or basically how they perform better. And then there's constant changes, coaching changes, and whatever.
Well, why didn't it work this year for you? Like, because it wasn't the most successful season that you could have had, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was pressure as the season went on, and part of that's just that usual nonsense about he gets paid loads of money, so he's got to win every game. But that actually, these programs take time, and historically, the best programs have had people who have built over a period of time. There are some instances which somebody comes in, wins 1 year, and leaves again, and it's like, I think that they tend to be a bit of a fluke. But
I think there are two things. I think you're right. It's, you could argue, early stages, but as well, we lost. I think we had 11 guys go in the draft last year. We lost a lot of players. Our defense lost quite a few players as well. So having those young players come in and play, I think when you look back on it, and when you look back on the performance of our players, I think we actually did quite well considering.
Okay,
don't get me wrong, not good enough.
Sure,
never good enough.
Yeah.
But I think when you take a lot of those things into account, I think it paints the performance maybe in a different light.
When you listen to Jim Harbaugh's podcast, the Sting says the Harbaugh family approach every day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. Does he indeed approach every day with an enthusiasm unlike any other person in the history of mankind?
Pretty much, it's demanded of you. Yeah, it's and that comes from his father. I joke, not around him, but I do joke that he's not the best coach in the world. He's not even the best coach in his family. Like, his father, Jack, is actually a phenomenal coach. And if you ever get the opportunity to, young coaches coming through, to listen to him, and his perspective on coaching is very, very impressive. But that's the family motto: attack the day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind.
You've obviously done that with your career. You start out in Scottstown in Monaghan as a woodwork teacher. Now, the most highly qualified woodwork teacher in the history of the planet, it seems, with a PhD. But how do you go from there to running the athletic program, one of the biggest football schools in America?
Well, it wasn't planned like that, but it's a passion. Just like any of us, we have a huge passion for sport, and at some stage, my plan was to teach from 9 to 4 and then go and coach. That's all I wanted to do. And having finished, the reason I stayed on to do a PhD was because college, university allowed me to continue to read and study sports science, and I would use my free time to go and travel, visit different programs. And one of them, to make a long story quite short, ended up being Bolton Wanderers, where at the time Big Sam was leaving. They needed, or some of their staff were needing, Big Sam needed some people to help him. And just through my travels, I'd learned certain things that he needed, or the program needed.
Was your travel designed to meet people, to open doors, or was it just designed to suck their information, and it kind of happened symbiotically?
Not even suck their information, just to learn. And what I'd found, even through meeting coaches, were when you go to the cutting edge, when you go to coaches who are actually performing, such as Miko. Even Miko Dwyer was one that I went to go and to visit and see. He had been at Kildare at the time, and just to see what he was doing as opposed to what you would read. And I realized very, very quickly that when you go and find the coaches who are actually doing it, it's very different from what you read and study. And that's what I found was my fastest way to learn. And
why did they let you in? Why did everybody say, yeah, Grant, come on?
People will let you in. People generally are. There's only one person I think has ever refused, to ignored a request.
Can you tell us
the
who?
All Blacks? No, I won't.
Was it the Monaghan football team?
No, Johnny Sexton knows who he is. But no, but like, I mean, no, you'd be amazed. People who, if you genuinely, my interest is genuinely in learning and studying. It's a passion. It's not for no other reason. And like the All Blacks, Canterbury Crusaders, all of those different teams were just happy to share. But also, you're also, when you go to visit these people to learn, you open your books. And if I've been with a sprint coach, I remember with the All Blacks, I would share all my notes with them, and they wanted to learn, because one of the big things that coaches, one of the biggest disadvantages that you have if you're working full-time with the team is it's difficult to go and visit. So if some Irish guy comes who's been to visit a sprint coach or a strength coach, and you're happy to share information. So that's how it took off, I guess.
So they feel like you're coming in, it can be a bit of a consultancy for them in some ways. It's like, so what is Charlie Francis doing with Ben Johnson that we can actually learn for our backs? Correct. That kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
That bit is all really amazing. I kind of wanted to ask you really about it seems to me there's very few jobs in Ireland that you could have actually got to a point where you could have done this and enjoyed yourself and had that level of professional development. And coming around to the notion that we don't really value coaching in Ireland that much, that there's a tradition of like paying outside managers who have a bit of a reputation or a bit of celebrity, who will come into a small GA club and take their 250 quid a session, when actually there are probably a bunch of younger people in the building or in the area who, if we trained to be a coach and gave them the skills and the facilities and the talent development, that would be far better spending the money on that. But we don't really value coaching that much. We're much more get that quick fix, get that celebrity in, get that whiff of somebody who's got a few medals. They know all about it, as opposed to actually, this is a science.
I guess it's often the prophet in their own land. There's a little bit of that as well. But you do, when you travel, you learn quickly. You learn from outside experiences, and but I think that Ireland's unique. I think the Gaelic games are unique. There's nowhere else in the world that has a sport like that, and. I spoke to the AFL Coaches Association a few years ago, and I stressed upon them the importance of the sport for society and for culture. It's not a business, in this country. What we have is very, very different, and we often look abroad, perhaps, as that being the aspiration, when that's not really what we should be looking at.
Yeah. What about that notion of coaching? Do we put enough value in coaching? Not to get me wrong, I think that Pat Daly and his team in the GA and that network of coaches that they've built, that's an amazing thing, and they're doing brilliant work. But like the rest of the country, and I think it holds true for a lot of other sports as well, probably needs to look at it and go, these guys, they're the ones with the intelligence, and they're the ones holding the coaching conferences, getting people over to have those conversations and present to them and learn from people. But most of the rest of the sport is like, I'd much rather have the guy with a couple of All-Irelands than the guy who's done the coaching course.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, because I think that a lot of when you look back traditionally over the great coaches we've had, they haven't come through traditional coaching pathways, or they haven't been there, but their insight and their intelligence, it's common among the greats that I would have come across outside of Ireland. So perhaps we don't value that intelligence, I guess, or that coaching ability enough.
When you've been meeting all these people, particularly earlier on in your days, just coming back to this exact point, do you feel that they've benefited more in their coaching expertise from their learned experiences, from their own things, from making it to the top of their game, potentially as former players, or do you think they learn more from the books they read, or from doing courses and from essentially academics?
I think that the best coaches that the coaches that I've felt have been most successful are those who've had learned more from life, from spending more time understanding people, being able to read people, being able to manage people. I think the most successful coaches in history generally have had teaching backgrounds, ironically, to date. I think one of the disadvantages of people rushing straight into coaching is that they have just this one singular mindset. They've only been taught in a particular way. many coaches who have, for example, Mourinho was a coach, was a teacher. Carlos Queiroz was initially started as a teacher as well. Alex Ferguson ran a bar. That experience, that life experience, cannot be underestimated. When you have to deal with people in difficult situations, manage groups, those skill sets are arguably more beneficial in the long run than going straight into coaching. One of the I guess, advantages that I have had in my career is that when you come up against other people who have gone straight into sports science or gone straight into coaching, everybody in that stream have been taught in a particular way. So everybody in the room is going to come up with the same answer. When you find somebody who has come to it late or with a different background, different experience, they tend to look at things a little bit differently.
You say that the two questions you ask everybody you meet is who's the most impressive person you've met and what's the best book you've ever read. Who's the most impressive person you've ever met and what's the best book you've ever read?
Charlie Francis was probably the brightest guy that I
Really?
came across.
But
Yeah.
Ben Johnson was a cheat.
Yeah, but
So that's really fascinating because we had Ben Johnson on the show and everyone's like, oh, you can't have Ben Johnson on the show, but actually he's got an amazing story. So what was that like?
Charlie, and if you watch the Dublin inquiry, Charlie's basic argument was that he had to come to a decision what to do with Ben either to win everything up until the races that mattered when he would come up against cheats or not. But as just in terms of an intelligence, there are very few people I've come across who have had that level of intelligence, the ability, and a wonderful. He used to say all the time that the only problem with common sense is it's not that common. He had a brilliant ability to be very practical, very pragmatic in terms of solving problems.
Even though ultimately he decides to dope his
Yeah. And
other than that though, did he have other stuff beyond?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. He would. Originally, I went to him to study. Only went to study sprint technique. So how to basically take team sport athletes, and I went with film to him of team sport athletes, and just his ability to break down, as the player accelerated, why they went more to the left, why they went, and just his insight, his ability to study the body, and to be able to draw those things and then go back and fix players' running technique, improve them, and to draw on those things is unique. There are very few people around the world who can do it or who've been able to do it since.
Yeah, and the book.
Oh, I've read so many. I think the one most recently,
Apart from your own, obviously.
apart from my own, The Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal has been the one I think that most recently I found fascinating, which again is very important in sport, because what you have at the minute, you've got so many specialists just trying to become experts in different areas, but the ability to draw it together is the most important thing in sport now.
How did you end up working with the Dubs?
So I'd worked with Bernard Dunn, and Bernard had said to me, look, do you remember Jim Gavin, who played for Dublin? Of course, yeah, I did. He said, well, he's over the under-21s, would you meet him? And I met him here one Saturday when I was home. I was working with Liverpool at the time. I was home, and we just met in a hotel, and he showed me what he was doing with the under-21s, and just on the analysis, and we spent some time going through it, and then he would send me some stuff after different games, and I would send him back based on the analysis they were doing, what I thought the game looked like, because I obviously didn't see it, and it was a very interesting exercise, because if I couldn't describe the game from the statistics, perhaps they weren't analysing which is the complete opposite. We look at the game and then try and come up with stats, and that's how it started. And then I get a call one night in Liverpool. Get a call one night to say that he was thinking of putting his hat in the ring, and would I be interested in getting involved, and yeah, that's how it took off.
So did you come back from Liverpool, or did you double jobs?
Travel back and forth, yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah. And what did you do for the Dubs? So at that point, that's before you become an operations director, effectively.
Yeah, so Jim was basically starting from scratch with Dublin. So we would have sat down at the beginning, and he would have asked me, look, what are your thoughts? How would you build this from the ground up? And he obviously had a very successful program with the under-21s, and you know, I shared with him my experience in rugby and soccer, and you know, yes, this is what I would do, and some of the things you know, were, and the great thing about with Jim is just his humility. Like he was willing to listen to and to argue and take things on board. He would take some things he wouldn't, but an incredibly his greatest trait is his humility, which I don't know if that comes across, but
I think it does. I mean, obviously, I'd be interested to hear you and Kimmage have that conversation now.
We've had that conversation.
Fair enough, because in the Kimmage piece you said that you would have big arguments in that Dublin setup, and that's like, because obviously it's always a united face that gets put forward in any great team. None of that stuff ever really, we don't really understand that happens. What are you debating? Like, is it about the training, how you're getting the players to peak for that period of time that they need to peak? Yeah,
like, and when we talk about arguments, we're talking about like really respectful debates, and I feel strongly about this or whatever, and it never gets, there's no animosity.
Yeah.
But that was because there was, you know, when you look at the characters that you have, Declan Darcy, Mick Deegan, you know, in that, you know, you argue your point, but you know that the most important thing is that we as a group agree on a particular thing, and also, you know, there were things, you know, I was wrong about certain players or whatever, and you know, you have to respect that.
Your job was to make sure that everybody was fit and healthy and performing. Was it?
My job was more as an advisor, consultant to them. They had their own training staff, their own coaching staff, and it was essentially to act as a consultant to them, because I couldn't be there all the time.
Yeah, okay. So somebody else was kind of putting the plans.
Yeah, Martin Kennedy was doing the training. You had, you know, Jim, Mick, they were coaching.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, from an overall perspective. Look, I think, or if they had an issue, you know, Fergus, what do you think? Is this a problem? And sometimes the problem that, you know, you see is not the you know, is not the original one. So, for example, if you know, start to struggle to score late in the game, well, it may not be fitness, it may be something earlier on in the game that you're not more efficient, so you don't have that energy at the game. So it's being able to ask better questions of the group as a whole, so that we come to the right conclusion.
Is that the thing that separates them, that they're not a pre-programmed team, that actually they are emboldened or empowered to make decisions for themselves?
Yeah, I think you know, one of the things that with the All Blacks, Canterbury Crusaders, even the you know, the great teams that I've been around, their players tend to be at the end of their career the most intelligent players. But they don't start off as intelligent players, but you have to empower them to continue to learn. And even Graham Henry would talk about, you know, he knew when his teams were getting to the brink of greatness, because they would make changes or alterations before he would see it. And that's really what you're trying to do. The one advantage or disadvantage, I guess, in American football is that because the quarterback's wired to the head coach, there's that constant ability to interact. In soccer, and you want to sit back and allow them to continue to learn so that they can make the changes. Because you can't, this isn't PlayStation, you know, you just can't make those changes. So you want your players to be, you know, to be the most intelligent and adaptable. That's the key thing, is adaptable.
And how do you do that on a practical level?
You do it in practice, and that it's not a smart answer, but that's what you do in practice. You create the scenarios where they have to solve problems, you know, at that point in time, and you go through the very same review process post practice as you would at post game. And so, you know, there is no difference between practice and a game. There's no difference. You have to treat it the same way.
That's why you say warm weather training is bullshit, because it's like a week out of your normal routine. It's like a holiday, effectively, from the good habits that you're trying to get people into.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, I think that obviously, you know, everything depends. But yeah, for the most part, and the other point to it, Dublin is, you know, it's Dublin. It's the capital. You don't need to go somewhere warm to find somewhere new in Dublin, and it's more important to continue to have that routine, built up so that you perform each week than it is to go somewhere.
What's the ceiling for this Dublin team then?
It's up to somebody else to stop them, really. I think I think you're looking at. I think they have to be admired. You know, I haven't been with them for 2 years now or so, but you have to admire what they've done. And I think the thing that I'm happiest about watching them is how they carry themselves on and off the field, because that in the long run for young kids coming through in Dublin or for any county, I think that's to be admired. You know, that's the most important thing, that humility.
And it makes them sustainable. It means that the next group of players coming through, I think Leinster Rugby have it now, that bunch of kids who are coming through are all like, look, I've done nothing yet, you know, there's lads in there with 3 European Cups.
Yeah, they used to talk about that, about the great Kerry teams, same with the All Blacks, same with Crusaders, where the goal is not success, it's not to win one All-Ireland. The goal is to have sustainable success, to win All-Irelands. That is the goal. It should always be the goal to win more than one, not just one.
And was that always the mindset of Jim Gavin? Do you feel that the two of you had that thing on a level par, that you both went in there thinking, right, we've got the same ideal here, long-term success?
Yeah.
You're very similar people.
Yeah, to absolutely dominate. Like, I mean, there's no other way to win. But you have to, yeah, it's a mindset. And you have to, again, it comes back to being able to agree to disagree, to find a pathway to win.
So why do you hate Mayo so much?
Oh no, I love Mayo. I was asked. Paul asked me about it, and I'd love to see Mayo win All Ireland. But I like it. I think it's.
It sounds like backtracking there, Fergus. Come on.
No. It's in the piece where it was at a league semi-final. Their coach, I forget the guy's name. We were going down the elevator at half time. We were down a man. They were up a few points, and you know, the head coach or the manager was making smart comments towards a stats intern, and I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. It's half time, game's not over, and I couldn't understand why you just wouldn't be a little bit more humble or cautious or respectful even. But no, I think, you know, Mayo have done exceptionally well, and it's difficult for them to come through, and they've had a lot of success as well. You know, it's unfair to judge them just on losing All Ireland finals, but you know, they've been very successful.
Yeah, no, that's a bit different from what you said. That they're never going to win one.
Yeah. And
you stand by that. You don't think they are going to win one.
I think in order to win, in order to be successful, you have to have that humility. Where two things: you have to be respectful of your opponent, and you have to be able to, you know, beat them, but respect, because you can't lose sight of the fact that they come so close. And secondly, as a team, then you have to look after your own teammates and give credit to the group as a whole. I think when you have those two things, I think then you build upon that, and you can have success.
And so they don't have that. You use the example of Aidan O'Shea going on the TV show, but Jackie Tyrrell went on the TV show and won All Ireland afterwards, and he clearly is part of that Kilkenny team that has that endless amount of success. Is it okay for him to do it because he's won the All Irelands already, and not for Aidan because he hasn't?
Well, Paul asked me the same thing. I think, you know, when you've been there, when you've done that, then it's easier to do it. Yeah.
It does. You feel like it actually stops the group from meshing to a point where they have that unlimited or unbreakable trust?
I think when particularly from a media point of view, whether it's the head coach or players, it doesn't matter. When somebody does an interview, their teammates are paying arguably more attention to that interview than the outsiders are. And how humble are you? How much credit do you give? And when you see players interviewed, smart players will give credit to the team. They don't talk, they misdirect or they redirect the question to talk about the support. And that's what...
It makes for very bad copy, though. No, we don't actually get to know the players. I mean, I guess...
Absolutely.
And so this is where
Richie McCaw is a classic example. You know, you'd ask Richie a question and
we don't know anything about McCaw, really, like as a person. Yeah.
But you do know his legacy.
Yeah.
And again, you're looking at it from a different perspective, but from a head coach's perspective, this is what you want. You want somebody who will bring the team together, keep that thread, so that the team as a whole is respected.
I would say Mayo have a fair bit of that. Like I think that maybe there's just a generational shift where players actually have this profile, and that's a lot of that is like given back to it seems like they're giving a bit of themselves, and so we actually get to know them and we support them a bit more. As a manager, you're like, no, I don't want any of that stuff. I don't care if people are on your side, that it's the message to the team that's more important.
I think at the end of the day, the team have to get across the line, and once that's achieved, then you can,
fair game.
But it's about at the end of the day, the goal is to win, and in 10, 15 years' time, when people look back on the history of success, there will be names on the trophy. It won't be about who's done interviews or who's done whatever. Yeah,
okay. It's a fairly hardcore view, and it's good to hear that from the inside, because like the managers will never tell us that. They'll be like, look, it's up to the players. And some managers have a fairly open door policy when it comes to doing interviews, because they feel that it allows the players to express themselves, and that's actually part of their evolution as a person. It gets them to the point where they can think on their feet. And again, it's part of that turning them into people who, when a hard question arrives in the middle of a match, they're actually able to solve it because maybe they've been practicing that aspect of their brain. It sounds like you don't really believe any of that.
As an athlete or as a coach, your job is to win, and that's where it starts and ends. And if media or if different things become a distraction, split a group, then you have issues, and maybe those things aren't portrayed enough. You know what I mean? In media.
Do you think you would have changed your opinion had Mayo won the All-Ireland last year?
I would have had to, wouldn't I? I would love to see Mayo. Paul asked me, asked me my thoughts, and like I say, until if you've got a team that is humble, if you've got a team that has that approach, they're very dangerous to beat. Very, very dangerous to beat.
There's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you, because you did a piece with Michael Moynihan, I think, in 2016, where you talked about the GPA and their silence on the issue of what GAA people call burnout, but which you broke down into 3 separate categories, because burnout obviously isn't very scientific, and that actually if they were to agitate for the proper management, for a legislative framework which prevented players from training/playing too much, then this might have an impact on some of the mental health issues that they're talking about, on some of the other things that are issues for them. Could you just explain to us a little bit about that? Because it would be good to get a bit of science out into the public debate.
Well, one of the misconceptions are that burnout is purely just either a psychological or a physical thing. You can overtrain somebody, and people would tend to break down in 2 ways. Broadly speaking, some people would break down physically first. Others have a great tolerance for physical load, and then they'll start to suffer psychologically, and that's insidious. It takes longer to appear. So it's quite difficult for people to track these things. If the role of the GPA is to be, to protect the player, I would argue that their primary goal is to try and look after the player. And what you're looking for there is you're looking for both legislation and education. So this goes back to your coaching question about, how well do we educate coaches? And a lot of these things we're only learning about them. We're only learning about them at the minute, and it's how do you track those things for players, because everybody's coming from different backgrounds. But that education piece is as important as simply having winter bans or winter workout bans.
So just there was an example recently, Derek Honan, the Clare hurler, like a sensational underage hurler, who ultimately does win an All-Ireland and plays his role for Clare winning their All-Ireland, retires at the age of 27, but hasn't basically played that much for the last 2 years, with successive hip injuries, that he can kind of pinpoint a summer where they just did loads of training, and he would be coming off going, look, I don't really think I should be doing it, and they'd be like, get out there. This is the culture. We're all going to do this together. We're going to live or die by this together. And you feel like that example could be made far more a case of, as a test case, by somebody like the GPA saying, this is what's happening to our best players. This guy should have another 6 to 8 years in the full forward line, winning games for Clare, inspiring the whole country, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that we all kind of understand what having a 21-year-old play Sigerson and potentially Fitzgibbon and wanting to be a dual under-21 player, and then the senior team comes and the senior club team and the under-21 club team, what that's actually doing to people.
And the sad part is that if it was properly planned, you could probably play all those games. You just can't do the training. And the worst thing about bans, and we see it in the NFL as well, where you've got a long off season, guys come back into training camps and then they get a sudden flood of injuries. It's not the games that are the problem, it's the training. It's the excessive training and the excessive training loads. If you play games and they're managed, those minutes are managed, the players, and there have been studies done in basketball again where people who've played the most games, regardless of sport, have fewer injuries for the first 2 years in the NBA. And it's because the player is alert, fully focused in a game, there are less chances of injury. The training very often is not as organised or probably not as focused. Maybe, and you've got two things in training, not to get too scientific. You've got volume, which is just the duration, the amount of work, and then you've got the intensity, which is the peak, the sprinting. The intensity is never the killer. It's generally always the amount of work, the total minutes, the total miles. And that's usually what causes the injury, and that's usually where the breakdown comes.
Legislation has not fixed this issue in stuff like the contact sports in America, particularly in the NFL, for example, you're only allowed a certain amount of padded practices and you're only allowed a certain amount of access to the players. If we were to limit the amount of access to the players that inter-county teams have and get the players to enforce it, they can just be in a WhatsApp group, WhatsApp and the GPA going, we heard that X county trained that night, and then a fine comes down from Croke Park and it automatically happens. That might be the way to wipe it out.
Yes, the only problem there is that if it becomes, an aggressive type of approach, that then, people become insecure and then coaches start to threaten players. But it's better if it can become a consultative approach, whereby, the coaches themselves or the manager, whichever, are educated as to, look, you don't need to do this. We can still achieve our, whatever it might be, psychological toughness. We don't need to do 17 nights in a row or whatever these, you hear these stories. There are ways to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve, in a smarter way. And that's where the education aspect is. And just to go back, briefly back to Dublin, to do what Dublin have done, or even Mayo, any of these great teams, they're obviously not doing, what you're talking about. They're managing the loads better, so they don't. But it borders on abuse, the hip injuries, and this has been going for a long time. The hip surgeries and the number of teams, it's worrisome for the game.
Is it just ignorance driving that?
I wouldn't say it's just ignorance.
It's a bunch of ignorance and ego and that kind of stuff. Somewhat,
and bear in mind as well, you've got coaches who come in, take over a team. They're under severe pressure to get results straight away. But a lot of it is just having that education to understand. Look, and also being able to manage key resources, so that you can, there are certain, I call them a McCraven principle, where you've got certain key players that will determine your season. If you don't protect those, you won't have them later in the season.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned the new managers coming in and needing to get results straight away. We've seen stories over the last couple of weeks of Pat Gilroy with the Dublin Hurlers taking people out, doing double sessions a day, bringing them out at 6 a.m. multiple times a week. Davy Fitz did it last year as well. Ultimately, we might not see the results of what Davy did last year with them. I mean, bad results up until this year, maybe next year. Is that a worry in your opinion as well, that these things might be a new phenomenon again, that suddenly pre-season's got to be more intense, more training sessions?
I think you have to be very careful when you take things out of context. I mean, you could be doing 2-a-days, and I've done 2-a-days, but it depends what you're actually doing.
It could be half an hour.
And it could be, it could be half an hour, and also the simple fact of getting somebody in at 6:30 sets a precedent. You can get them up at 6:30 and do a stretching session, do a yoga session. So, and that's where the education, that's where having all of the information is very, very important. But
I have a feeling Mickey Whelan's involved with the Dubs. I have a feeling everything's being done pretty well there.
Yeah, Mickey's. There's an incredibly bright guy as well. Yeah, I would be, and the question you have to ask is, who would you trust your son and daughter to coach?
Yeah.
Mickey would be one.
Yeah, totally. We're going to do a Jim versus Jim in a minute. This is our little gimmick to see is it Gavin or Harbaugh. But before I do, I just want to ask you about Colin Kaepernick, because obviously you were at the 49ers when Kaepernick was there with Harbaugh ripping it up. What's your experience with Colin Kaepernick?
I've been around a lot of professional athletes in many different sports. I've never been around anybody as polite to everybody on the staff as Colin Kaepernick. I can't say a bad word about him. I cannot say a bad word about him. And people, you hear so many different people speak about him, and take the issue out of it just as a person. You can't criticize him as a person, whether you agree with what he did or is doing. And then if you follow him, it's no surprise to me when you follow the money that he has given to the different charities, the fact he has stayed silent as well. To me, he's always been a very polite person. You would see him speak to the janitor, turn around and speak to the janitor when there's nobody else in the locker room, the exact same way as he would speak to the head coach.
Yeah, I think he's a legend. I just think that like what he's done, and to have that courage, like, and to effectively throw away millions and millions of dollars, like, it's pretty amazing. So, and I'm glad, like, he comes across as this unbelievably humble person, despite the talent that he has.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen him in situations where, he would be leaving crowds and, people are badgering him, and he will give the same patience to all those different people.
Will he come back? Can you come back to the NFL after the period of time that he's out?
I think he can, because I would get to work at shortly after 6, and his car would be there. You know what I mean? There are very few people who I've seen work as hard as him. So any other athletes I would question, but he worked exceptionally hard, always did. I'm sure he still is. So other athletes, other quarterbacks, yeah, you'd doubt.
Yeah.
But not him. And he's quite young still.
Yeah, totally.
Are you surprised by what's happened?
I'm surprised that the NFL have allowed it get to the stage it's got to. Yeah, and I'd hope that it would change just for the sport itself, because I think that I think everybody just let it get out of hand. It could have been solved an awful lot quicker.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, we wanted to ask you a lot of things about Jim Gavin, a lot of things about Jim Harbaugh as well. So we're going to do a quick Jim versus Jim segment here. It's nothing, well, it is quite gimmicky, I guess. We've got an image there set up and everything, and it's just yes or no questions. We might ask a few follow-ups at the end of you if you give us any particular answer. So there's 10 questions here, and essentially, which Jim would you pick? So first of all, who pays closer attention to sport outside of their own field of expertise?
Jim Gavin.
Who's more hands-on with details within their own field?
Jim Harbaugh, yeah. Jim Harbaugh coaches a lot, yeah.
Who reads more books?
Jim Gavin.
Who watches more films and TV?
Jim Harbaugh.
Who thinks about the media more?
Oh, I'm not even sure about that one, actually. It's a draw. That's we'll give them both.
Who looks after their own body more?
I'll give it to Jim Harbaugh, but it's pretty close.
Who would have a better chance of success, Harbaugh in the GAA or Gavin in the NFL?
That would be a heck of a final. I've no idea.
Who's more likely to go into a career in politics?
Oh, Coach Harbaugh, yeah.
And who cares about their legacy more?
Coach Harbaugh, yeah.
And then a final point, who would you put your last tenner on? A Jim Harbaugh team, 1 score behind in a Super Bowl with 2 minutes to play, or a Jim Gavin team, 1 score behind with 1 minute to play in an All-Ireland final?
Oh, Coach Harbaugh. Yeah.
Would you?
Yeah.
But Jim Gavin's done it, and Harbaugh didn't.
Exactly.
Oh, so he's got to do it again. Yeah. Okay. All right.
This time around, yeah.
Were you with the Niners in the Super Bowl?
No.
You came after that. Yeah.
Went downhill then.
Yeah. What was that environment like when you went into it afterwards? Because it felt like they weren't finished. It felt like they still. I mean, they weren't, because they got to the championship game the next year with the Sherman.
Yeah, it was. Some of the players there were phenomenal, like Justin Smith, Alden Smith, Patrick Willis, and Navarre Bowman. Some of the greatest players that have played the game, and an incredibly special organisation as well. The opportunity to, sit and have lunch with Keena Turner with 4 or 5 Super Bowl rings. You know what I mean, and to be able to pick the brains and to learn from those people. Special time.
It was a real pity that falling out happened the way it did. Like, at one stage there were literally separate changing rooms because
Well, that was. Yeah, and again, this is something that was blown out of proportion. What had happened were that we were building, the new stadium was finished, and we were able to move into both. And some of the older players were just really content in the old locker rooms, which were, literally 50 yards apart. So it wasn't as big a deal. But again, it was.
Afterwards, everything becomes a huge deal when falling out, that happens.
And then people are walking by. Well, that must have been the issue. That must have been the cause.
In the end, everybody lost.
Yes, as the Golden Goose was killed. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly the 49ers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Fergus, this has been great. Thanks very much. Is there anything else, any other State of the Nation issues that you'd like to bring up if on your little black book?
No. Any other questions you've got? I think we've just, I think it'll be. I can't wait until Mayo win the All Ireland. We
have a load of questions. People asking, is it ever too late to get into coaching, and about your book as well. So your book is available on Amazon. Anywhere else?
Game Changer, Barnes and Noble.
There's Jim reading it.
yeah.
Did I say that?
He wrote the foreword. No, but it was great to get the opportunity to put everything from all the different sports, from rugby, soccer, football, and I need to get you a copy for here.
Yeah, totally. We'll stick it up on the back.
Just because it's been 2 years since you've been home, and we might not be speaking to you again for a while. What's your dream job? Are you in it at the moment?
Yeah, I've never had a plan. For me, I just love coaching, love helping coaches, and love helping kids. Because I think it was when I grew up, when I was playing, I just had so many questions. I started playing football late, and I wanted to learn. When I wasn't the fastest, I would try and read what I could about speed to get better.
Yeah.
And
if the GPA came to you and asked for some help on what the guidelines they should be trying to get legislated for, is that the type of thing you'd be open to doing?
Yes, but the GPA have.
Or are you so anti the GPA?
No, I'm not anti GPA. I just think that it's a very wealthy organisation that could. I think there's better ways maybe to handle those finances and to support the players. I think the other thing too is this sport is the Gaelic games are such a special sport culturally and societally for this country. It needs to be protected as such. This idea of a Super 8, this elitism is will be to the detriment of Irish society.
It's funny how you're on that side of it when actually your day job is to get people to be as good as they possibly can, which
because I know the downsides of elitism and professionalism in other sports. And I had this conversation with the AFL as well, and I explained to them, and they're in complete agreement. The fabric of the G is part of the fabric of this society. It is not and should not be an elite sport.
How do you stop the dubs getting bigger and bigger and better and keep the people who are going training in Scottstown happy? These two things seem like they're, at the moment, the link between them is so taut that it could spring at any time.
You see, I disagree. I think that what Dublin have been able to do is the aspiration for clubs around the country is to achieve that level. When I was involved with Dublin, you would hear rumours of money being paid and sets of gear. The Dubs got exactly what every other team got in terms of gear, in terms of there were no warm weather training camps. So when you have that kind of program here, learn the lessons as opposed to criticising and that's the important point.
I agree with that, but the amount of money that has been pumped into Dublin to help them to get to that point can't be pumped into every other county.
Yeah, so it's obviously whatever funding has to be distributed in a manner that supports, but again, it has to support the country. These are the Gaelic games. It's incredibly important for our society. It can't, if it just feeds this elitism, well then you're just going to end up like rugby is in the UK. And the downsides of that professionalism are very, very worrying for society across the board. Because if you take the NFL and American football, what you have is you've got a sport that's played primarily by a minority across the board.
As in that it's essentially geared towards elitism. There is no other way. If you're not making it to the top, you're not playing the game.
Correct. And it's only, the game is restricted to certain areas in the States.
Yeah, and ultimately, that hasn't helped anybody really.
Yeah, and what is the role of Gaelic games in Ireland? That's the question. The question is not how much money can it make. The question is not should it compete with the Premiership. The question really is what is the role of Gaelic games for Irish society?
Yeah, and it doesn't really feel like that question is foremost all the time.
I think we lose track of it. I think because we always assume that the NFL is or the NBA is where we should go. Well, it's not quite. It shouldn't be.
Fergus, great stuff. Thanks very much. And
thank you, guys.
Continued success and congratulations on everything. And hopefully Mitch can have a winning season next year and end up in a bowl game.